Ch.44 Paradise to Ashes, the Second Coming of Fangxin. Si Lian didn't think Shi Qingxuan would suddenly light a fire, and didn't even have the time to stop him. Before it was too late. The flames were exceedingly bright and revealed the silhouette of a black-clad man. The man in black had his head hung low against the stone wall at the end of the path, his face as white as a sheet, his hair a mess, but underneath that unkemptness was a pair of eyes that shone with determination, like burning ice. Although he sat cross-legged without a trace of discomfort, the stench of thick blood in the air indicated he was gravely wounded, and was obviously imprisoned here. His "I have nothing to say" was probably him mistaking them for interrogators. Shi Qingxuan saw his face and cried, "It's you." That man didn't seem to expect other people either, and was taken aback, looking like he wanted to say, "It's you too," but alas, held back. Si Lian calmed his ruoye that was ready to attack. "So, you two know each other?" After crossing so many hurdles and finding someone, Shi Qingxuan looked relieved and was about to respond when that man cut in. He said in an indisputable tone, "I don't know him." Shi Qingxuan raged at those words and pointed at him with his fan. "Is it so shameful to know me?" "What hurtful words, Ming Shung." 36. "I'm your best friend." The man denied it resolutely. "I have no friends that would run around in that sort of attire." Shi Qingxuan was still in his ragged purple silk dress, truly, a shameful sight. Si Lian wanted to laugh at the thought that there were really people in this world who would use someone's best friend to validate themselves. It was definitely Shi Qingxuan's style. But Ming Shung, if he remembered correctly, of the 5 elemental masters, the Earth Master's name was Ming Yi. Si Lian spoke up, "Are you perhaps the Lord Earth Master?" "It's him. You've met before," Shi Qingxuan replied. Si Lian looked Ming Yi over and said, "Have we?" He didn't recall ever meeting such a character. "You have," Shi Qingxuan said. "We haven't," Ming Yi stated. "Yay, you have," Shi Qingxuan said exasperatedly. "Last time at the Banyu Pass. You guys didn't forget that fast, did you?" Seeing Ming Yi's face go from pale white to grim, Si Lian finally remembered. Last time when they met at the Banyu Pass, wasn't there a black-clad lady next to Shi Qingxuan? Exclamation mark. Hua Cheng already told him at the time that that wasn't the Water Master, but must also be one of the 5 elemental masters. As expected, Shi Qingxuan was not only passionate about transforming into his female form, he was also passionate about dragging others into doing the same. No wonder the black-clad lady at the time looked extremely pissed off and disgusted. Thinking back on how Shi Qingxuan begged him to join in the fun, Si Lian sighed, thinking that was a close call, and was glad he didn't relent. "Lord Earth Master, was the ascending fire dragon set forth by you?" Si Lian asked. "It was," Ming Yi answered. They had found the right person. Si Lian nodded and said, "The Lord Earth Master is probably heavily wounded. We best make our escape now and talk later." Without any prompt, Shi Qingxuan knelt down and carried Ming Yi on his back. "Then let's get out of here." The 3 retraced their steps and Shi Qingxuan talked as he walked. "I say, Ming Shung, aren't you good at fighting?" You were perfectly fine back at the Banyu Pass, so how did you get beaten up this bad in just several days? How did you piss off that Crimson Rain sort? Flower. His tone was a teasing taunt. Si Lian mentally noted, speaking as though he isn't afraid of getting punched. They are indeed good friends. Mingyi looked like he'd had enough of listening to Shi Qingxuan talk, and only said, "Shut up." Si Lian also wanted to know the answer to the same question, but changed his wording, "Lord Earth. Master, why would Hua Cheng want to make things difficult for you?" Mingyi didn't tell him to shut up, but didn't answer, either. Si Lian turned his head slightly to look at him, and saw he had his eyes closed. After having been imprisoned and interrogated for days and heavily wounded, Mingyi must have finally let down his guard after being rescued and could relax at last. It wasn't anything urgent anyway, so Si Lian didn't try to wake him. The three ran up the stairs and Si Lian threw out his dice at the top. He didn't know what number he tossed out in the dark, only that before them came a soft creaking sound, and a crack of light appeared. Si Lian pushed at the door, and was just thinking about whether he'd have the chance to take Lang Ying away too, when he realized the first step he took was hollow. The moment he felt himself fall forward, he cried, "Don't come out!" Si Lian somersaulted in the air and fell on something hard. He was just feeling relieved that it wasn't some bladed mountain or a sea of fire he fell into when he raised his head and realized a bladed mountain or a sea of fire might have been a better alternative. Hua Cheng's exceptionally handsome face was inches away from his brows raised, looking at him. This time when the stone door opened, his hollow step made him fall on top of Hua Cheng. The place of his fall was the armory. Hua Cheng was seated on the throne of the armory, composedly wiping the scimitar Yiming. Even when someone suddenly fell onto his lap from above, he'd only moved his hands away and stopped the cleaning without any air of surprise. He calmly looked at Si Lian, as if waiting for an explanation. Of course Si Lian had none, and could only lay in his lap and stare back boldly. Suddenly, he saw another person at the peripheral of his vision, and when he turned around, he saw it was Lang Ying. That bandaged boy was sitting on the floor looking frightened, his hands grabbing his head, staring at the two of them. Why was Lang Ying here too? It looked as if Hua Cheng was interrogating him. And when Si Lian's eyes moved upwards, he saw half of Shi Qingxuan's white boot stepping out. There wasn't time to think, and in a hurry, Si Lian gripped Hua Cheng's shoulders. "I'm sorry," Si Lian cried, then pushed Hua Cheng aside. This push threw Hua Cheng over a meter away, and he even tumbled a couple times. After tumbling, Hua Cheng immediately stood and steadied himself, and by then Shi Qingxuan, carrying Mingyi, already jumped and landed with ease the same spot Hua Cheng was just sitting. Si Lian forced himself to look back, and Hua Cheng was still looking at him without a word, but one side of his brows was raised even higher. Si Lian leapt to his feet and backed off a few feet, apologizing as he did so. "I'm sorry. I'm sorry." Lang Ying ran towards Si Lian while watching Hua Cheng, still appearing quite afraid, and hid behind him. Si Lian shielded him and said, "San Lang, allow me to explain." "I'm waiting," Hua Cheng responded. Wait, isn't it the opposite? Shi Qingxuan spoke up. He should be the one who owes you an explanation. He's the one responsible for the missing heavenly official. Be wary, Your Highness. This was exactly the situation Si Lian didn't want to face. He looked at Hua Cheng intently. San Lang, I don't know what the misunderstanding was between you and the Lord Earthmaster, but let's all calm down and talk this out. The best case scenario would be Hua Cheng letting them go without harm. Although the Earthmaster was wounded, his life was not at stake and he wasn't missing any limbs. If he could drop it, then this wouldn't have to devolve into the worst case scenario. If Hua Cheng let them leave and they reported back to the heavens, then they'd be in his debt and Si Lian could use it as a chance to ask Zhang Wu to dismiss the whole thing. However, Hua Cheng said instead, Earthmaster. What Earthmaster? After a pause, he continued, Oh. Did you mean the one the Windmaster is carrying? He's nothing more than an inept subordinate of mine. Hearing this, both Si Lian and Shi Qingxuan were taken aback. He's obviously one of the heavenly officials, how dare you say otherwise? Shi Qingxuan said. Hua Cheng laughed. Then, I wonder why your honorable heavenly official would hide his identity, drop his respectable title, and come work as an officer under me. Hua Cheng drew out Yiming in a crescent moon flash. If that is truly the Earthmaster, then what? Patience to put on an act for 10 years. In the past 10 years I had thought him suspicious from time to time, but there was no proof. If it wasn't for bumping into him and the Windmaster at Banyu, I'd still be in the clouds. In that moment, Si Lian understood everything. So, that's what happened. The Earthmaster went missing, and was imprisoned, ultimately because he had hidden his true identity. 10 years ago to go undercover as a ghost officer under Hua Cheng. In other words, he was a spy. Hua Cheng had thought his actions suspicious, but without concrete evidence, he'd only kept him under his watch. And it was only recently that Hua Cheng finally uncovered his identity as the Earthmaster. During that journey to the Banyu Pass, Hua Cheng had seen the Earthmaster next to the Windmaster. Even under the disguise of a woman, thanks to the Windmaster, Hua Cheng still saw beneath that fake skin, and discovered that black-clad lady was the ghost officer he suspected, and locked on to his identity as one of the 5 elemental masters. After the whole ordeal at Banyu had concluded, Hua Cheng probably left Puchi Shrine to go conclude things with the Earthmaster. It may have been during Hua Cheng's pursuit to kill, whilst under dire circumstances, that Mingyi set off the distress signal. Then, Zhang Wu summoned Si Lian and gave him the mission to run this rescue. That a heavenly official did not mind his duties, but instead went undercover in the ghost realm for over a decade, was quite the scandal. Never mind the politics behind it. If Mingyi was to remain imprisoned and tortured, then all heaven would break loose. If he was to actually die at Hua Cheng's hands, it would be absolute chaos in the world. If that day were to come, no one would be spared. After thinking all this through, Si Lian could only say, I understand that the fault is ours. But, San Lang, I hope you will let us go this time around. Hua Cheng watched him intently, and after a moment, said in a calm tone, Your Highness, some things are best not to get involved in overmuch. Suddenly, Shi Qingxuan cried from the side, Wind, come to me. The moment the fan came out, wild gusts started blowing through the armory. The many weapons hung on the walls and on the shelves started rattling. Lord Windmaster, we haven't done anything yet, Si Lian said, alarmed. I don't think either of you are going to make a move first, Shi Qingxuan said. Sir'll be the bad guy this time. Wind. Wiinnnndd come to me. Exclamation mark. Exclamation mark. There was a huge cracking sound, and Si Lian could feel layers of dust falling on his head from above. He raised his head and saw that it was the roof that was being raised by the gusts, breaking at the seams into a large crack. The armory had no windows or other visible exits, and Shi Qingxuan had no intention to fight, but rather to escape through the crack of the roof. Within the mad gales, Hua Cheng's raven black hair and maple red clothes flew wildly with the winds, but his person never moved. He smirked. You have a fan, and coincidentally, so do I. From one of the many shelves, Hua Cheng retrieved a fan. It was small and intricate, its spine and leaf made of pure gold, serene and beautiful. Hua Cheng twirled it in his hand, slapping it open. He grinned. Wordlessly elegant amidst his murderous aura. He flipped his hand and fanned, and a strong gust shot towards them with a blinding silver flash. The three dodged and heard behind him the sound of hail like darts smashing against the walls and ground. When they turned their heads to see, it was long rows upon rows of golden foils nailed to the ground. Each foil thin but deeply embedded, its sharpness apparent and vicious. Each weapon within this armory was a treasure to behold, even a weapon he grabbed at random could have such a murderous effect. Hua Cheng flipped his hand again and another golden gust blew. The winds called forth by Shi Qingxuan were strong, but the stronger they were, the more dangerous the situation became. The armory was a mere chamber, its space limited. A portion of the winds raised by the Windmaster fan would rebound around the interior, hauling the golden foils along, dancing in this madness. Si Lian was afraid the golden foils would harm people, so he shielded Lang Ying and cried, Lord Wind Master, please stop for now. The golden foils had continuously brushed closely against Shi Qingxuan and Ming Yi. Shi Qingxuan wanted to stop too, however, the roof had been raised by his winds, revealing a crack, and if he should stop now all of his efforts would go to waste. Just then the golden foils encircling them suddenly flew upwards uniformly. There was a cacophony of crackling before a person broke through the roof and jumped through the crack, debris and dust coming down with him. The moment he landed, that person shouted, Lord Windmaster, I apologize, but I just couldn't sit still anymore. Shi Qingxuan was overjoyed. Qianqiu, you've come in the nick of time. That young man carried a longsword, its blade the size of a grown man's palm. It was indeed Lang Qianqiu. His longsword was a shimmering gold, but looking at it closely, it wasn't because his sword was golden, but because it sucked up all the golden foils, covering the blade completely, making it look as if it was a golden sword. Lang Qianqiu's longsword was forged by a curious metal born of a lodestone mountain, and had the ability to magnetize metals. as long as the object of suction did not exceed a certain level of spiritual power. Once he had the sword in hand, he could mentally release its ability and magnetize all surrounding metals, melting it into his blade. Sure enough, soon the innumerous golden foils were all sucked into the sword and dissolved into the blade. Seeing this, Hua Cheng laughed out loud, closed his fan and threw it away behind him. Are the heavenly officials so pathetically poor that they couldn't let a teeny bit of gold go? If those words were directed at Si Lian, he would only pretend not to have heard them. But they were directed at Lang Qianchu, a noble born of royalty. He hadn't cared for riches his entire life, and although he knew the enemy was intentionally taunting him, he was still boiling with rage. He raised his sword with both his hands and struck towards Hua Cheng. Hua Cheng drew out his scimitar with one hand, generating silver shimmers in the air, calmly ready to welcome the attack. Lang Qianchu's strike used all of his power. He was like a newborn bull, fearless of tigers, but Si Lian had clearly seen the difference between their strengths, and if this strike was to land, he would die for sure. On the sidelines, even Shi Qingxuan, who was no swordsman, watched with alarm and yelled, "Qianchu! Don't!" Exclamation mark! Exclamation mark! But in that split second, how could a shout stop the arrow that's left the bow? Just as the blades of a sword and a scimitar were about to make contact, a blinding white light blew up within the armory. It was a light so immense it covered every inch of the armory, and everyone lost their sight temporarily. All they could see was white. Si Lian, however, was prepared, and could see with some difficulty. His right hand gathered all of the powers he borrowed from Shi Qingxuan and created a giant flame and blazed it towards a random direction. A corner of the armory immediately caught on fire. Soon after, Si Lian released Ruoye, and wrapped himself, Shi Qingxuan, Ming Yi, Lang Qianchu, and Lang Ying. He shouted, "Lord Wind Master, blow us upwards." Even though Shi Qingxuan couldn't open his eyes, he still followed Si Lian's direction. He raised his fan and snapped downwards, and a violent twister formed from flat ground, blowing towards the ceiling and, at last, breaking through the shaky roof. Ruoye had the 5 of them in a bundle and flew towards the sky. In midair, sight finally returned to many of them, and Shi Qingxuan could see down below them giant flames ablaze, black smoke heavy in the air. The armory was burning. He was afraid Hua Cheng would give chase and flapped his fan. Now it really became fanning the flame. The blaze instantly erupted in size, and kindles landed on all the nearby buildings. Now over half of Paradise Manor was ablaze. With great difficulty, Si Lian finally grabbed hold of the Shi Qingxuan, who was fanning with all his might. "Lord Wind Master, please stop fanning. The whole place is going to burn down." Startled, Shi Qingxuan cried, all right, I'm stopping. "Let me go, Your Highness, your grip is too strong." It wasn't until the Wind Master stopped his winds that Si Lian let go. He looked down, and amidst the red flames, Si Lian was still able to spot a crimson silhouette. They were too high in the sky and he couldn't see clearly, but his gut instinct told him that in that moment in time, Hua Cheng was standing there, watching him. He didn't give chase and didn't put out the flames. He only stood there, letting the wildfires devour capriciously. Outside the Paradise Manor, screams and howling roared from all over the ghost city streets, and crowds of ghosts ran amok. Lian couldn't breathe, and his voice cracked, mumbling to himself, "I only wanted to start a small fire. To create a distraction, how did it turn out like this?" It was only earlier that Hua Cheng had leaned against the doors of that armory, half-jokingly telling him he wanted to gift him the entire armory with every weapon inside, but now everything was engulfed in a sea of fire. Although there may be many golden devices that were unafraid of intense heat, there were surely also many that could not touch flames. After all this burning, many treasures would become ashes. Lian had not expected the flames to grow so violently, devouring the entire Paradise Manor. Even if Hua Cheng didn't consider it a home, it was still his residence. Seeing how crushed Lian was, Shi Qingxuan also felt bad. I'm really sorry, Your Highness. I didn't think things through and only wanted to escape faster. This is all my fault. It was most definitely only a small flame at first. If the Crimson Rain Sword Flower comes knocking for paybacks, you just tell him to come to me. Don't worry, I can pay whatever amount. Money is never an issue. But money was definitely not the issue. Lian closed his eyes and couldn't speak. Shi Qingxuan patted his shoulder in consolation, but suddenly felt wetness in his palm and a strange, stark smell of blood. He turned his head to see, and his face lost color. "Your Highness, what happened to your hand?" Exclamation mark. Lian's right hand was covered in blood. His entire right arm was thoroughly dyed with blood, and the trembling was not slight. Yet both his hands still sternly held onto that white silk band to keep everyone from getting blown apart by the wild winds. "What's going on with you?" Exclamation mark. Shi Qingxuan cried. Lian blinked back and strained to steady himself before shaking his head. "It's nothing, just a small injury. It'll get better once we get back." "That white light was you." Shi Qingxuan remembered. "Your Highness, you broke those two off." "I'm a swordsman, after all," Lian replied. Shi Qingxuan had guessed right. Right then, when the blades of Hua Cheng and Lang Qianchu were about to make contact, Lian flashed in. He picked up a sword from the pile of weapons on the shelves, and made two moves between the sword and the scimitar. The first move, he knocked back Lang Qianchu's longsword. The second move, he blocked the scimitar. Yiming. The strength of those two moves was not only powerful, but extremely well controlled. Even when Lian blocked both blades, the force of the strikes were not rebounded onto the attackers. Because, with Lian sandwiched in the middle, he used his sword and his own arm to absorb both attacks completely. Lang Qianchu's longsword was manageable, but Hua Cheng's scimitar was a force to be reckoned with. The sword Lian used was one from Hua Cheng's collection, so naturally it was also a formidable blade. When the two blades met, it blasted that blinding white light. With the two moves, the first strike against Lang Qianchu's longsword created a crack, and the second strike against the scimitar Yiming shattered the sword to pieces. All of this was done within a fraction of a second, faster than the eye could see. Shi Qingxuan looked at the miserable state of Lian's right hand, the whole right arm a bloody mess. He commented, "Your Highness, you're way too intense." I can't believe you blocked them single-handedly. The flower-crowned martial god, sword in one hand, flower in the other. Shi Qingxuan only remembered the flower, but had forgotten. Si Lian ascended because of his sword. Thinking back on how close of a call it was, Shi Qingxuan's heart was still racing. Thank goodness your Highness had the moves, otherwise who knows into how many pieces Lang Qianchu would be cut by Hua Cheng. The strange thing was, next to them, Lang Qianchu appeared to be unharmed, but his expression was frozen, like his soul had left his body. Qianchu. Shi Qingxuan called. Qianchu, are you all right? Wake up. What's with you? Has your sight not returned yet? Riding on tailwind, the group of them finally reached the heavenly capital. Dragging and carrying, they rushed past the ascension gates and ran straight for the great martial hall. Lang Ying couldn't enter the hall, so Si Lian settled him in a small side chamber. No one seemed to be on duty, so he called within the communication array. Is there any honorable official here? Please everyone, come quickly to the great martial hall. It's an emergency, we have a wounded official. As he shouted, next to him, Shi Qingxuan snapped his fingers and switched back to his white cultivator robe, and released 100,000 merits. It's 2 wounded officials. Si Lian said hurriedly, Lord Wind Master, don't be so excited. We can just talk, there's no need to release any merits. Everyone will naturally come. No, Your Highness, Shi Qingxuan said. You have to know, spreading merits works faster than talking by 100 times. Soon enough, a voice came from afar, who's wounded? When the word who was uttered, the voice was still far away, but by the last word the person had appeared, and it was Fangxin. He entered the hall and looked at Si Lian, then at Lang Qianchu, his face faltering. I'm fine, but the Lord Earth Master seemed to be heavily wounded, Si Lian said. After a moment of silence, Fangxin said, what happened to your right hand? So what? Another voice came. There's so many heavenly officials. Whoever returned unscathed after a round of patrol. The voice was decorous and mellow, but the words sharp. It was Mu King. He crossed into the great hall and also took a look at Si Lian, then at Lang Qianchu. Yet his expression was the opposite of Fangxin. Having only raised a brow, as if ready to spectate a good show. He saw that Fangxin moved to check on Si Lian's arm, so he bent to check on Ming Yi. He said, so this is the Lord Earth Master. During that exchange, a number of heavenly officials poured into the hall. The Earth Master Yi had always been inconspicuous and out of sight, so for many, it was the first time they had ever seen his person, and they cluttered around staring at him curiously. The masses were mostly confused, not knowing the reason. They were called to the great martial hall, but having collected the Wind Master's merits, they had to come and check things out. Thanks, but I'm all right. It'll get better by itself after a while, Si Lian said to Fangxin. Fangxin didn't mince words. Watch yourself. Si Lian uttered another thanks softly, but when he turned around, Lang Qianchu was watching him with a frozen expression. Your Highness Tai Hua, what's wrong? He asked. Fangxin also noticed something off about Lang Qianchu and questioned, was His Highness Tai Hua also injured somewhere? I don't think so. Let me see, Si Lian said, and extended his hand, reaching for Lang Qianchu's brow. Yet, in a flash, Lang Qianchu seized Si Lian's wrist. There was hesitation on Lang Qianchu's face, as if he discovered something, but wasn't sure. A fire had started burning within his eyes. Si Lian felt a wave of rage trembling from Lang Qianchu's arm to his. Now all the spectating officials had noticed this strange situation and started whispering amongst themselves. Shi Qingxuan and Mu King both started to rise and Fangxin spoke. Your Highness Tai Hua, what are you doing? Lang Qianchu finally moved his lips. He only said 2 syllables, but Si Lian's heart sank to the very bottom. Guoshi. Lang Qianchu gritted his teeth. Si Lian's pupils shrank slightly. The onlooking officials, half guessing, half confused, muttered, What Guoshi? Who's the Guoshi? Some were more astute, and figured it out. Lang Qianchu was the crown prince of Yong'an, and the Guoshi of Yong'an during his time was the second of the 2 wicked masters, the Guoshi Fangxin. 37. No one knew of his origin or his real identity. Yet here, Lang Qianchu had Si Lian in his grip and called him Guoshi, meaning, Si Lian was the evil that brought ruin to Yong'an, the Guoshi Fangxin. Exclamation mark. However, Si Lian was the crown prince of Xianlei. The kingdom of Xianlei had fallen in the hands of the kingdom of Yong'an, so why would he go and become the Guoshi of Yong'an? The Prince Taihua was renowned for his optimism and cheerfulness, never having played mind games, nor made things difficult for anyone, and he had never exhibited such an expression, half despair, half rage, half enmity, half hatred. Lang Qianchu had Si Lian in a deadly grip, his breathing becoming harsher, and finally said in a strained voice, I clearly killed you with my own 2 hands. Sealed you in that coffin. You Guoshi, you certainly are a crafty one. Heavens! It looked like something big was about to go down today. 36. Shung is a more formal way to say older brother than gege, but is also used informally between male friends, meaning bro. 37. Fangxin means affection of a young woman. Next chapter. Ch.45, the black-hearted Guoshi, Gilded Banquet awash in blood. Fangxin was the closest to the 2, and he looked at Si Lian with an unconcealed shock. Mu King, on the other hand, had glowing eyes. The schooled shock had a hidden layer of excitement. Shi Qingxuan let go of Ming Yi and said, Qianchu, did you misunderstand something? If His Highness was that Guoshi Fangxin, how would you not recognize him until now? Another voice rang out the sidelines, Qingxuan, you don't know. Legends say the Guoshi Fangxin was proud, mysterious, and cold. He'd always worn a white gold mask, having never shown his real face to anyone. His Highness Taihua must have never seen his real looks. The one who spoke had his arms crossed and stood far on the sidelines. It was Pei Ming. Just seeing his face made Shi Qingxuan annoyed, and he swung his whisk. If that's the case, then no one had seen what the Guoshi Fangxin looked like. Why must General Pei make it sound like it's a sure thing that His Highness Xianlei is the Guoshi Fangxin? When in action, Shi Qingxuan and Si Lian were ridiculous and hilarious, but once in the heavenly court, they changed their composure, calm and poised, mindful of their behavior. Just then, a snow-white silhouette appeared from the back chambers. The moment he arrived, everyone calmed down. The chattering officials all stood in their place, silencing the gossip, and bowed. Your Majesty. Zhang Wu raised his hand slightly and everyone straightened once more. He walked willfully, and as he passed by Si Lian, he tapped on his right shoulder. The sleeve that was still dripping with fresh blood ceased immediately after the tap. After taking a moment to look over Ming Yi, Zhang Wu stated, "It's nothing serious. Settle the Earth Master in." Thus, 4 famous medicinal heavenly officials came over to lift Ming Yi up and took him away. Qingxuan looked as if he wanted to follow, but seeing the current tension in the Great Martial Hall, he couldn't not worry and decided not to go after all. With his hands behind his back, Zhang Wu returned to the throne before speaking again. So tell me, what's happened now? Why won't Taihua let Xianlei go, and why is Xianlei bowing his head? Lang Qianqiu glanced at Si Lian, seeing that he was still silent, as they were surrounded by heavenly officials. There was no need to fear his escape, so Lang Qianqiu released his hand and turned to Zhang Wu in a bow. My lord, many hundreds of years ago, this man altered his name to Fangxin, sorted my clan, and brought ruin to my kingdom. I request a duel, and pray the Lord will be our judge. Within the Great Martial Hall, even ones who had never heard of the name Fangxin ran to research the name within the communication array. What was uncovered was an astonishing tale. Good thing Ling Wen was present to answer everyone's query. The Guoshi Fangxin was the savior and teacher to the Crown Prince of Yong'an, Lang Qianqiu. He was named one of the 2 wicked masters because of the infamous bloodbath that washed the Gilded Banquet of the Yong'an monarchy. What was the Gilded Banquet? Qingxuan asked. Lord Wind Master, Ling Wen replied. This Gilded Banquet was a tradition passed down from the nobility of Xianlei, and called thus because all cutlery, utensils, cups, and instruments were of the highest grade of gold, exquisite and luxurious. After the kingdom of Yong'an was established, at the beginning, they announced to the world that they would not follow the culture of excess from the old kingdom, and put all their focus on their people. Yet, after a few decades, the old ways were relearned, including the culture of excess. Ling Wen continued, on the night of the 17th birthday of the Crown Prince of Yong'an, the palace threw a gilded banquet in celebration. That Guoshi Fangxin, in that feast, with one sword in hand, slaughtered every member of the royal family in attendance. The golden goblets toppled and blood spilt like wine. Only the Crown Prince of Yong'an escaped because of his late arrival to the feast. Otherwise, he too would have been annihilated. This coup d'etat was a huge blow to the foundation of Yong'an, and if it wasn't for Lang Qianqiu, who had the people's heart and his hard work, there would no doubt be a riot. It was with great difficulty that the chaos was settled, and soon after, the Yong'an monarchy released a bounty to pursue the fugitive murderer. At last, when he was captured, Lang Qianqiu killed the evil Guoshi Fangxin with his own 2 hands, sealed the corpse within a triple-layered coffin, before sealing it again underground. However, the roots of the monarchy had been gravely damaged. Since then, it inevitably declined, before it was overtaken by another clan in the end. Lang Qianqiu glared at Si Lian. I never understood why you did what you did. You said you couldn't stand seeing us on the throne, but I didn't believe it, and I never thought you wanted to overthrow the monarchy to take our place. But now I finally know why. The heavenly officials had their eyes wide with shock, muttering to each other. This is revenge. It couldn't have been anything else. The kingdom of Xianlei had fallen, so he had to ruin Yong'an too. Yong'an killed his royal parents, so he had to murder the royal parents of the crown prince of Yong'an. An eye for an eye. It's pure vengeance. But the ones who wiped out Xianlei weren't of Lang Qianchu's generation. This rage was unreasonable. And here I thought the laughingstock of the three realms was a fool, but he's actually quite the aggressive character. Going undercover as a Guoshi in an enemy state, slaughtering the entire monarchy in one go. Incredible. Si Lian could feel Jun Wu's eyes on him, and closed his own. He heard Jun Wu say, Tai Hua, you firmly believe Xianlei to be Fangxin, but do you have proof? The Guoshi Fangxin was the one who taught me swordsmanship. How can I not recognize him the moment he strikes? Lang Qianchu replied. The gossiping poured in like tides. Never mind making a mess of things, but isn't teaching the crown prince swordsmanship a little too extra? No wonder after the third ascension we haven't seen him touch a single sword. He's afraid to show his tail. Lang Qianchu stated, this time I went to the ghost city and fought with Crimson Rain Sword Flower. The moment he mentioned the ghost city and Hua Cheng, many of the officials shivered again in fright. But Lang Qianchu continued. When I was 12, there was once when I was kidnapped during an outing. The kidnappers dragged me onto the streets, and when the guards caught up, they started brawling. A street performer was dragged in, and bruised as he was, he intercepted the fight with but a tree branch, and easily rescued me with but a few swings. The kidnappers and the guards both suffered grave damages, and it was this street performer who escorted me all the way back to the palace. Out of immense gratitude, His Majesty my father and the Queen my mother fervently tried to retain him, and discovered his skills in swordsmanship, and so he was ultimately invited to become the Guoshi. He taught me the way of the blade for 5 years. I'm more than familiar with his style. How can I be wrong? Your Highness Tai Hua, Mu King said faintly. You're saying that what you saw was but a shadow, and other than you, no one else has seen it. So all of this is only by your word. Mu King's argument sounded like it was in Si Lian's favor, but it was actually more complex. He had already seen that Lang Qianchu wouldn't let this go, and the more he was questioned, the more he would prove himself not the least bit helpful to Si Lian's situation. Sure enough, Lang Qianchu demanded, fine. Please bring me a sword. There were many martial gods within the hall that carried a sword, and hearing his call, there was immediately a sword thrown towards him. Lang Qianchu caught it and forced it in front of Si Lian. Take it. We'll duel now without holding back, using everything we've got, and see whether we have the same style, and whether I was taught by you. Everyone thought to duel in the great martial hall was a reckless act, but with the Gilded Banquet, that a crown prince's entire family was sorted in cold blood, they could understand why he was this agitated. Si Lian's injury was still on Shi Qingxuan's mind, and he said, Qianchu, His Highness blocked that attack from Hua Cheng for you, and injured his right arm like this, so how can he duel with you? Hearing this, Lang Qianchu suddenly extended his left palm, and smacked heavily upon his own right arm. There was a loud crack, and a mist of blood spurted out from his entire right arm from the shoulder. Bleeding profusely, the limb fell limply. There wasn't any need to check to understand that it was a heavy injury, and everyone was shocked. Si Lian was also taken aback and raised his eyes. "What are you doing?" "The Lord Windmaster was right," Lang Qianchu said. "You did injure your arm saving me, and so I return an arm to you. But saving me is one thing, killing my clan is the undeniable truth. I know you're dexterous, and can use a sword with either arm without lessening your skills. We'll duel with our left. Pick up the sword if you're a man." Si Lian looked at the sword, then looked at him, and finally, shook his head slowly. "I've sworn many years ago to never kill with the sword again." With those words, Lang Qianchu recalled that night when he finally arrived at the feast, the scene of that black-robed man pulling out a longsword from the dead bodies of his parents, his eyes reddened with madness, the sword in his left hand emitting a shaking, crackling sound from his left grip. Shi Qingxuan swung out his whisk again and it wrapped around the sword to hold it down. "I think there might be some sort of misunderstanding here. If that Guoshi Fangxin had always worn a mask, then anyone could have pretended to be him to commit murder. What does my lord think?" Everyone turned the gaze to the jaded throne. Qianlei, Zhang Wu spoke. "Yes, my lord," Si Lian bowed. "Do you concede to Tai Hua's accusations?" Zhang Wu asked. "I concede," Si Lian replied. The "I concede" was uttered in a frosty tone, very unlike Si Lian's usual manner of speaking, and the faces of Fangxin, Mu King, and Shi Qingxuan all dropped. Zhang Wu nodded, and asked, "The Guoshi Fangxin who spilt blood upon the Gilded Banquet, was it you?" After a moment of silence, Si Lian raised his head, determined. "That's right. It was me." Words of steel with no turning back. "So you admit?" "Very good," Lang Qianchu said. As mentioned previously, there were numerous heavenly officials with mortal blood on their hands in the upper court. But truthfully, there hadn't been that many who had their blood debt escalate to this point. It might be because those mortals didn't have someone like Lang Qianchu in the family who could ascend and demand justice from the heavens. Before, Pei Su had General Pei as a shield, but in the end, he couldn't escape exile. Si Lian had no one behind him, so now it would all depend on whether Zhang Wu still valued past affections, and held the heart to protect him. Yet many still couldn't fathom what attitude Zhang Wu held towards Si Lian. The first ascension, the crown Prince of Qianlei, was of course treated with the utmost favor. The second ascension, the two had a huge fight, and Si Lian even stabbed Zhang Wu a few times before he was defeated, and this third ascension, the two had been at peace with each other, as if the past conflicts had been forgotten, and Zhang Wu even built a palace for Si Lian in the nicest area of the heavenly capital. It was truly difficult to understand. Now, everyone had their ears attentive, waiting eagerly to hear how the Lord would sentence Si Lian. However, before Zhang Wu had the chance to pass a verdict, Si Lian spoke up first. "Qianlei has a presumptuous request." "What is it?" Zhang Wu responded. "I humbly ask the Lord to remove my godhood, and banish me to the mortal realm," Si Lian said. Some of the heavenly officials were astonished, and at the same time amazed. Of course no one wanted to be banished. It's not easy to ascend. To work so hard to climb so high, only to fall, just thinking about it felt rueful. To dare ask for banishment from Jun Wu so straightforwardly, a lot of them couldn't do it. Some of the other heavenly officials didn't think much of it. After all, at this point, it might be better to back off than to fight to the death. Si Lian had been banished twice already, a third time probably meant nothing to him, and maybe he was even used to it. Lang Qianchu on the other hand, objected. I don't need you to banish yourself. Ascension happens because you have the skills. I only want a duel. I don't want to fight you, Si Lian said. Why? Lang Qianchu shouted. It's not like we've never fought before. Life or death, the outcome doesn't matter, let's just put an end to this. Si Lian said plainly, no reason. Fight me, and you will for sure die.